All right, Chair Malele, it's all you.
Welcome to our social media ad hoc policy meeting. It is Tuesday, February 15th. Do you have an agenda that I could?
I wondered if we could just kick straight off. The way that we had discussed this last time was that we were going to kick off this time with section D. I did note for everyone in the email that that does not mean that we won't come back to the comments and the edits that we made to the intro. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Turner, for integrating those. But just to kind of make sure, to keep us moving and make sure that we at least get through the entire document before we start iterating. Lieutenant Turner is ready with the document share. Happy to readjust. I don't know, Chair, perhaps you want to open the first couple of minutes for people to make general comments if they have them, or we can get straight into the work and then hold commentary till the end.
Well, does anyone on the panel have any preliminary comments?
No, but we do have two new attendees from OPD. Perhaps they could introduce themselves. And hey, Commissioner Jackson.
Yes,
Cece Lindsay.
The panelists could introduce themselves.
Sure, I can start, Chair. Good evening. My name is Captain Holmgren. I apologize for no video. I'm literally picking up my 9-year-old from her soccer practice. So I should be home momentarily where I can have access to video. But I am the commander of our Violent Crime Operations Center. Been with the department for about 23 years. I've worked with the Police Commission on several projects, including ad hoc policy. So looking forward to just being able to get in here and help out where I can.
All right, good evening, everyone. Drennan Lindsay, Deputy Chief with the Oakland Police Department, been with the department for close to 24 years. I'm in charge of the Bureau of Investigations, which includes our Criminal Investigation Division, Crime Lab, VCOC, and Property and Evidence Unit. And happy to be here as well. And I don't have access to video at this moment. Thank you.
Great, fabulous. Well, if that's the case, Lieutenant Turner, would you mind taking us straight into the document? Let's get into the rules, please.
Yeah, thank you, Rania, and so good to see everyone. So yeah, as Rania just mentioned, Section D lays out some specific rules around personal social media use by members of the police department. So these are ones that are very specific and straightforward about prohibitions, compliance with certain things, etc. So as you kind of see through, and I'll go through just the general topics that this covers, and then we can kind of go through and determine if people have any questions or comments, suggestions, etc. As you can see in the document, some suggestions from previous ad hocs were already incorporated. So this does have something that requires overall compliance with other city and department rules. Some other things might cover conduct, for instance, administrative instruction 71, for instance, might cover some conduct on social media, a prohibition on discriminatory posts and interaction on one's personal social media, a prohibition on harassment and threats of violence, prohibition on any social media use that compromises or detracts from the department's mission. So as you can see, this includes content about extremism, which was an addition from mainly suggestions by Director Flynn around extremism and other members of the ad hoc. This gives guidance and some requirements or prohibitions on the display of department uniforms or logos in someone's personal social media, especially around like commercialism, things like that. Also here, department identification and display for commercial endorsement purposes is strictly prohibited. It gives guidance on the use of, departmental or organizational identifiers on social media. A limitation of the use of personal social media on duty, among other things that just like any workplace, the use of sort of work time for personal endeavors is limited. The prohibition of the use of city email for one's own personal social media. They have to use their own personal email for that. A prohibition against disclosing confidential information. As you know, law enforcement does include a lot of confidential information which cannot be disseminated on one's personal social media. Removal of social media content that we have in there as well, some additions from previous ad hoc around reasonable and prompt action to remove content where another member might be depicted in someone else's social media without their consent, or if they wanted that removed. And then mandatory reporting, and again, another addition from the ad hoc. So that's the totality of section D. And if there are any comments or questions,
Commissioner Jackson has her hand up. Go ahead.
Yes.
Hi there, everybody. I actually put it in the chat, but I didn't put it in the chat correctly. I'm just trying to make sure that references to joking, being unacceptable or something like that, because when people get in trouble for stuff, their way out is usually, oh, I was just playing, or I was just joking around. There's that one picture that has all the, the commissioners, all the people of import in like these just t-shirts, looking like we're, I don't know, in t-shirts and underwear or something like that. There's nothing, it's just in poor taste, but it's not vile. It's not, and I just want to, oftentimes we get ourselves in trouble with the whole, I was trying to be funny, I was trying to joke, and I just want, in terms of, when we put expression in here, that there's something that speaks to that as still not being appropriate or unacceptable or something. And I'm not sure how to put that, but I don't see anything else in here that like speaks to it.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think that's a good point. That's one of those ones that's really hard because it is kind of on a line, and it's it's hard to tell one person's joke is something that's really harmful. And so I think we've tried to be a little closer to things that are not relatively easier to prove, but that it's a lot clearer. And especially I think that the sort of that kind of thing really falls into something that compromises or detracts from the department's mission. So when we talk about things like harassment or discrimination or something like that, those are pretty clear areas in the law, in policy, and the way that these sort of employment actions can be handled. It's very easy to see something that's like could be constituted as harassment. It's harder when we have things like jokes or people trying to be funny or cool or something like that. We just we've had things where people have said something about their desire to not do any work, for instance, and put that on their social media as like something that's cool. Even though the amount of work that one puts in or does not on behalf of the taxpayer is kind of between you and your employer. At the same time, that compromises, when it gets on social media, compromises or detracts from the department's mission. So I'd argue that something like that would probably be included in this section here, especially when we have a lot of other kind of guidance to our members around understanding that what they post, even if it is marked as private or something like that, could be public. Once it becomes public, it reflects upon both them as a person and them as a member of the city, employment, and a police employee or police officer, and that those things coming together could, even if everyone agrees that it is just a joke in bad taste, that, like you said, it's not harassing, it's not discriminatory or something, it's just a joke in bad taste, that still could be said to compromise or detract from the department's mission. So I think that's probably where it would be. And also I would say that something like that is going to be addressed in the training. And I know we've talked a lot about that sort of thing when we're talking about creating these trainings, creating and keeping up to date with these type of things, the memes, the other things that are, popular and or suddenly have negative connotations or things like that, and those type of things that I think will be best addressed in the training environment.
Okay, so hold that thought. Would you still mark something in there, Lieutenant, just so that we can kind of circle back?
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson, can I move on from that comment?
No, absolutely. Like I said, I
Added.
was trying to capture something I did not yet see, and I didn't want us to get too down.
You got it. You
Thank
got it. I see Ann Janks and then DC Lindsay. Ms. Janks.
So is the chair title something that you keep the rest of your life, like president, or are you now Commissioner Jackson?
Oh, no, I'm commissioner.
Okay.
She may have accidentally called me chair. It's just a habit. We can give her another week or so,
So I have a little piece of paper that has written on it joke and banter, because I couldn't agree with you more. And my concern is that if we look at the reason that we are actually here under orders from the judge today, it's because of behavior that was in fact viewed as joking and bantering by management. So I don't think that we can reasonably expect line officers to be able to get those nuances, given that management very, very recently was unable to discern the problematic nature of some things and instead dismiss them as joking and bantering. So I really do think that it's very important. I understand it's going to be addressed in training, but I think that it is a really important point for us to ensure is included in this. And I don't think it's quite as difficult for us to, it might be a little bit difficult to find the perfect language, but the concept isn't that it's just a joke in the same way that my joke about a frog crossing the road is a joke and possibly not in very good taste, but it is a joke that that falls under one of these things. Like when you put up a photo of the police commission in a demeaning way, you are in fact demeaning reform and oversight of the police department, which is what in my mind distinguishes it from a bad joke about a frog. I really do. I would like to find the language to put it in the actual policy, so that when it's being trained on, there's something to back that up. And I think that given the number of times that you're going to hear the defense that it was just a joke or we were just bantering, I think that this is exactly the kind of thing we do want to put into the policy and really emphasize. So I thank you, Commissioner Jackson, for raising that.
Absolutely.
Thanks to you both. Okay, so noted, yes, Lieutenant, and whether it lives in rules, it might also show up maybe in a couple of places, rules and considerations. DC Lindsay.
Yes, thank you. So in relation to what Commissioner Jackson was articulating, my perspective is it borderlines insubordination of people in authority, because yeah, I guess in our perception in the department, we view the police commission as an authority figure, like a boss, like a supervisor. And so I believe we have a manual rules section that covers insubordination or, saying disparaging remarks about your chain of command. So that's kind of how I see it. And I don't know if we can add that to it or, but that may, or we can reference that in the policy. But to me, it's more absent of just the joke, but more in alignment with insubordination.
Thank you, DC Lindsay. You got that, Lieutenant, also? Yeah, just perhaps something at the end of that. I also just want to acknowledge, Mr. Pasley, I do see you. I just want to acknowledge that Director Flynn has joined us. Good evening, Director. Go ahead, Mr. Pasley. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah.
Let me,
Just wanted to suggest that we consider the phrase abusive humor as a category that we might put in to our policy manual, because it's abusive behavior that we're talking about here, and it's a form of abuse, and we're addressing that generally.
Yeah.
So I just throw that out as a phrase that we might turn to.
That's
That's all.
great.
thank you for that. And Mr. Percy, I do want to also acknowledge that you have submitted some edits for this, for all of it, but also this section. So we can also read those out, or have you read those out, however you'd like. I just want to make sure that your work was noted.
Oh, thank you. No, they're fairly minor. I think they're pretty self-evident. So
Okay.
unless somebody's got some comments, yeah,
As you like.
yeah.
Okay, perhaps, we're still kind of talking, perhaps start us at the top again, Lieutenant. I know we've kind of stopped on this. I just want to make sure that the panel gets to see, and also anyone of the viewing public, the section that we're on. We are on rules. I think the compliance is pretty straightforward. If no comments, we can keep moving into through D. Keep going then. Oh, Anne Jenks, your hand's up. Off you go.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble understanding exactly which part of D we're on. Are we in D4?
No, we were just in D4 because that was where it was starting to prohibit expressions. So since Commissioner Jackson had the note about jokes, and that was a discussion, that's where it landed, but we can start, I'm starting us from the top. Okay, do we need to, I'll call it D1, straightforward. Any issues with D2 or any concerns? Okay, D3. D4 we've started to discuss. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, content that depicts any member in an obscene or sexually explicit manner. Which people should officers be depicting in an obscene or sexually explicit manner?
Sorry, could you restate the question? I'm not sure I understand.
Which people should officers be depicting in an obscene or sexually explicit manner?
Okay, so you'd like that change to any person, content that depicts any.
No, I mean, I'm asking, it's like officers, it just seems to me that we're going to have residents ridiculed, have been ridiculed in the past, crime victims, people accused of a crime. I mean, I'm envisioning a lot of things that don't fall under this, that members of the commission, maybe we shouldn't have depicted obscenely either. I'm just asking why it's limited.
I see the captain also has his hand up. Is that in response, Captain, or did perhaps your hands also come back down?
I was gonna agree with Ms. Jenks that I don't see why we would just limit it to just to members. It should be any persons where that would fall into that criteria. So I agree with Ann on that.
And this was originally taken from basically to keep the image of a person who is a police officer from sort of being sullied from their own. But I can also see the other thing that was not considered, which is sort of expression that expresses or depicts others. So yeah, we'll have to edit that there.
In the same vein, then, Lieutenant, in the following bullet, othering of certain classes of people, I imagine you just want to keep it broad, of any people. Subjugation of persons for immutable characteristics or political belief. Oh, that's a lot of GRE words.
Yeah, we'll change it to other.
Yeah, just
Well,
know that in and of itself starts to other.
okay, yeah, I'll make sure this sentence accurately depicts that.
Anne, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about what a majority of reasonable people would find unacceptable. I understand kind of what the point of it is, but I just feel like it very quickly gets into a discussion about who's reasonable and who's the majority. And I mean, for me, this policy is very much about, and I don't know if this is the place to say it, but this policy is about ensuring that residents do not have a cause of concern based on public expressions from officers. And, you know, so if a majority is everybody and it's something that's only offensive to Muslims, I mean, I just feel like this is language that I think you can kind of go down a little bit of a hole on and isn't quite the point of the policy either.
Go ahead, Peter. You're on mute, so I can't see if you're.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Are we talking about that language at the top of page 8 where it talks about which the majority of reasonable people? Is that the phrase we're focused on? That's in D4 at the
Yes.
end.
Yes,
Is that what we're talking about?
yes.
Yes, I focus on that as well. Just a quick comment. I saw it as a higher standard and one that didn't necessarily have to be in there. That was my first reaction to it. It is a high standard, but again, you know, just the standard of reasonable people is sufficient. I feel that's just my personal opinion on it. And because if you talk about a majority, then how do you satisfy that standard? I mean, how do we take a vote? We don't want to get into that. You know? We just want to be reasonable. And that's just my comment. And I think we can throw that phrase "the majority" out. I think we can toss that.
Good thought. Thank you, Mr. Passley. Chair Malele.
You. So I just want to go back, the othering of another person. I think we had put in there, somehow it said certain classes of people, but I think we had wanted to put protected classes of people there. And the reason for that is because what we talked about before is that somebody could consider Black Lives Matter, for example, a extremist political, racial, gender-based group or whatever. And so it's about making sure that we are targeting the kinds of extremism that like white supremacy and things like that, not, you know.
Mhm.
I see. Thank you, Chair. I see Anne and then Director Flynn. But just before we move on, Anne, is your point about that, because I want to make sure that we address where the chair was going, is your point to that end? Or are you picking up something else?
I'm offering language.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so it wasn't why my hand was up, but this is language that I found that I thought might be a very good descriptor of, because sometimes protected classes, this is language that I found in the District of Columbia that I thought was a little bit more expansive and might better define the groups that we were talking about.
Thank you for that, Anne. I'll keep your hand up and I'll come back. Director Flynn, also to the chair's point or a different point? I just want to make sure that we close this out.
To the chair's point,
Please go ahead.
as I'm understanding the chair's point. I actually think that that whole last phrase in that section is way too subjective and needs to go. I would just add the more specific language that has been suggested by Anne or something to that effect, which gets to protected classes. But since everybody hasn't necessarily memorized what the protected classes are, I think listing them is better if that's where you're going to go. This whole thing about reasonable people is always up to the dominant group, who's reasonable and who's not. Black people are always unreasonable. We're clear about that. I walk in skin that basically labels me unreasonable. So I just don't think, and that's not a complaint, that's empirical, that's implicit bias. So I would just take that whole, like some Wizard of Oz guy behind the curtain will decide what's unacceptable, it's not a good look for me. I would just say what we said right before that. I think it's pretty strong, except you could add the delineation of those protected classes, political beliefs, and you could, go on beyond political beliefs to include, gender, race, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I'd do with it. I don't think reasonable people will ever be me, unfortunately.
I've made peace with being unreasonable. I like that. Thank you. It looks like the lieutenant's already followed. Chair, how does that feel for you now? Great. All right. And back to the original reason that you raised your hand, if you've still got it.
I think it may have been addressed. I have to finish reading Lieutenant Turner's change. So do we still need language about immutable characteristics to your point about it being a word that many of us would have to look up?
Yeah, I'm curious. So to OPD, what's your take on? Oh wait, I think it might have come out altogether. Comment on.
No, it's still there. Immutable.
Yeah, what's your take on big words like subjugation of persons for immutable characteristics? That's quite a mouthful.
Obviously, my take is they're great, but no, it's. I think there's definitely room for changing it if we need to address it in training. At the same time, like I do want to be precise about the thing, that there are certain things that are that you can't change. So if we need to say, characteristics that one can't change or something like that, but that is at the heart of these things, as why it is that we have these type of rules, because there are things about people that they cannot change, that they are, nonetheless othered for, right? And it's immutable characteristic of yourself. But I think, there's either it's the theme, not necessarily the word that needs to come through in my opinion. It needs to come through that basically this is who this person is, and making fun of them, whether it's because of a physical or mental disability or the color of their skin or any other of these myriad characteristics. That's sort of the theme that we're working for. If there's other language that works for that, I think that's fine.
I'm curious if Director Flynn has come across any, because I had to look it up to figure out what an immutable characteristic was.
It's fancy language. I think that plain language is always better. You can say immutable, you can describe immutable with plain language. I know the lieutenant could do that. Just say what you said. Characteristics, innate or permanent characteristics.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Just something that is more plain talk is always better than fancy words, because fancy words can trip people up or just take them off track, wondering what does that mean? And then they're not paying attention to the rest of the training or whatever the rest of the conversations. Plain language is always best. We definitely recommend that in communication.
Thank you for that. I see Mr. Pursley and then Commissioner Shea and then Ann Janks. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, just a phrase, personal attribute is a phrase I like. Something to think about. Personal attribute. That's pretty plain, pretty basic.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Shea?
I'm typing out a suggested edit. I think subjugation of other persons for immutable characteristics kind of is describing a particular type of stance of a group that we want to capture. It's not just the denigration or othering. I feel like it is important. I do think it can be shortened up, and subjugation of other persons added to the clause right before it, which is a denigration, comma, othering, comma, or subjugation of persons based on, and perhaps getting into the protected categories may eliminate the need for immutable characteristics, the term. But subjugation, I think, of other persons is describing a particular thing that I think needs to be captured by this policy. I also had to look it up, right? And it's the action of bringing someone or something under domination or control. I think that's rather important.
Agree, thank you. Anne?
I know I offered this language, and I was looking at the language under D2, wondering if we should just use the same set of descriptors in both places. And I realized that D2 actually has some things that are missing from the language that we just put into D4, most notably military and veteran status. And I think ancestry is not fully reflected, but I could be convinced otherwise. And then, so that's question number one. Do we want to add that? And then number two is, oh, now I've lost four. And number two is, do we want to change the list in number two so that D2, so that it's the same as the list in D4?
I'd want them mirrored, wouldn't you? I'd get tripped up if there was a list up there and then a list down here that was a little bit different. But
ideally, they should be the same.
So perhaps, Lieutenant, you go for the most expansive then. So yeah, whatever's missing from there, we'll include it down there and vice versa.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm reading out the comments. I know that Mr. Pursley just, oh, it's abuse of humor, not abuse of humor, but that was also really clever wordplay. And language itself can subjugate. Do your best. Thank you for that, Director Flynn. I'm not entirely sure I understand what you mean by language itself can subjugate. So are you suggesting that we include that?
I don't know. No, I'm just saying, again, my argument, I'm backing up my argument for plain language, is that plain language, lack of plain language is a class issue and it subjugates people without a lot of education. So if you've had a lot of education, subjugate is going to subjugate, or other words that we're using here are going to be more accessible to you. So it's kind of an accessibility thing. And I know even the officers have different levels of formal education, and we want this to be written for, it's not being written for the Supreme Court, it's being written for people who have to use it. And that, so it's just, it's just one of those things. It's one of these things that we don't all get to have access to. That's all. It kind of oppresses sometimes.
Thank you. I think the chair's also agreeing. Okay, let's move to D5. I feel like, Lieutenant, you've got some good stuff top there. All right, let's keep moving. Thank you. Commissioner Shea, you have your hand up.
This is a
And
question, yeah.
And then thanks. Go ahead, Commissioner.
This is a question to the managers of OPD. What are your thoughts about this display of officers in uniform, the caution, those that have had to manage, Captain Holmgren, DC Lindsay? What are your thoughts?
I think you have to try to find a balance. I think that, we do want our officers to have a certain sense of pride when they are engaging in being promoted or achieving something that is notable, that should be celebrated. But we want to make sure that they're not, also putting on uniforms and having symbols where, there's an issue with, right? So I think you kind of have to find that balance. There is some safety concerns too that, I personally, I think that, there are some people in the society who don't have a favorable opinion of law enforcement and could seek to, present a threat to them. So it's something that me personally, I don't, go on having displays of my uniform. I don't have social media. So, but it's just something how I was, my own personal belief. I don't know how Chief Lindsay feels.
Thank you for that, Captain Holmgren. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Captain Holmgren says. I understand that we don't want to discriminate or, cause people to have a misunderstanding. I do believe that we need to recognize that we have a whole generation of police officers that work for the department, that work in this society, that they grew up on social media. And so to them, social media is a way of life. It's a way that they communicate, and, it's a way that they express themselves. And so I do believe that we should have rules of engagement, but I don't know how much we should detract from allowing them to have that freedom of expression. So for example, I remembered a young lady who is a really very good officer. She's very well liked. She's an informal leader in the department. She's African-American. Her uncle was a Oakland police officer. And so she did like a TikTok post. She thought it would be a great way to, show some of the young girls that she mentors. She has been at mentoring events with myself at Merritt College prior to COVID. A lot of young ladies took to her immediately, particularly from the high school level. So my point is, she did a TikTok where she had her uniform on, and then she showed herself in regular clothes. And so she was doing that to kind of, show this group that, oh, it's not a bad thing to be a police officer. And so, I believe that her intention was good. I don't know how much we can, take away from that type of intentionality, you know, especially when we're looking to recruit, especially when we're looking to keep the profession alive and wanting people to join the police department and to be able to humanize police officers as much as possible. So I'm a little conflicted on that because, you know, it is a way that we're able to recruit and we're able to humanize and we're able to have those who have well intentions to reach out to audiences that I'm not able to reach out to because I'm much older. And so my children are in that age group that use social media as a part of in their, you know, voice, how they breathe social media. So that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you, both of you. I see that Commissioner Jackson said for the training, maybe we can show by example what the do's and don'ts could be. I have a question actually about the training, especially when it comes to department uniforms and logos. Would you guys mind sharing when you come to train, when you will come to train on this policy? Like, I'm curious as to the language around it, because this must be quite difficult, right? Normally, if you having something like a uniform or an emblem or something is a point of pride, and if you're saying don't because it could be harmful, I'm curious what the language you're sharing with members of the department around that, or the messaging and signaling.
Yeah, the like you said, it's a balance, and we do try, you know, especially it also depends on your audience, right? The main thing, you know, with recruits, at least that I find to be the best, is to really you know, drive home that sense of pride of their reason why they became an officer. Most people will have a reason, you know, that is personal to them, but it is really about a larger theme, you know, a theme of service or of wanting to give back, a particular bad incident that they experienced or their family experienced, that they don't want others to have to experience, and something like that. It really can drive that home, that reason, and sort of something to hold on to when, you know, things like at any job don't go that great. So that is part of it, and you know, a form of esprit de corps, and you know, feeling as part of a team, because a lot of the actions that we ask people to do is in support of others, whether it's support of the community or support of the other officers who are you know, helping the community, and so that does mean you know, having that pride. On the other hand, there are, you know, the social media is so pervasive, and it really, things can spiral out of you know, out of hand and something like that. So it's a difficult balance. I don't think necessarily we have anything specifically that says that, and so this is kind of one of our first stabs at really addressing that sort of thing, because you know, in other places it just wasn't. You know, in previous times, it was mainly, you know, photos, print photos, something like that, where people would have them in their homes or, you know, on the refrigerator, like, you know, my mom has, and not really go any further than that.
Thanks for explaining, Lieutenant. I did sneak in with that one. I do have a follow-up thought, but I will follow the order. I see Ann Janks, Commissioner Jackson, DC Lindsay. Ann Janks, you first.
Thank you, Lieutenant Turner. I think you're arguing my point that we should really just be discussing public expressions generally, because trying to narrow down the social media versus non-social media is just, I think, like stabbing Jello. I don't think that this is where this goes, except I think that if we're separating out social media, we may need to mention it here as well. There have been many instances of officers making a change to the uniform to celebrate being a part of what, if they were not law enforcement, would be referred to as a criminal gang, or engaging in anti-constitutional policing by, you know, bending their badge or having a special patch, that kind of thing that they add to their uniforms and their cars, etc. And adding them on social media as well would, I think, be a problem. I'm assuming that's addressed elsewhere in the policy around uniforms. Are you, Lieutenant Turner, looking confused?
No, I'm not confused. No, it's in the policy. I just want to be very clear that when you're talking about officers, where you're discussing cases in other agencies around the country and not the Oakland's police department. Is that correct?
Well, we have had officer gangs. That's the reason we have our second decade of federal oversight. I don't recall whether they had special badges or not, but yes, it's happened elsewhere, and let's write it into the policy so it doesn't happen here.
That is in our uniform policy. Yeah, we have very clear, about modification of equipment or uniforms for precisely that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you have a picture of a person in the uniform on social media, it's very easy to amend the photo. And I'm saying maybe we should add it here that you can't amend things to.
Or Lieutenant, could you reference that policy about member uniform and equipment?
Absolutely.
There was something, we had a similar, yeah, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I wonder whether that's another way to kind of get into that. Thank you, Anne. Commissioner Jackson.
Just say Regina is fine with me.
Not yet.
So one of the things that we do in youth development, like I'm not getting on TikTok, but I do watch the kids and the way they change their outfits. So they might start out in the police uniform and then, the next scene they're in regular clothes or the other way. But one of the things that we have done is to show examples of, okay messages so that people can live in the spaces that they're in, which is highly technological and visual, but recognize when it goes too far. And I'm not sure, given your communication staffing, if there is at least a scenario that people can refer to, not that we're saying submit your videos over here to make sure they're cleared in order to go over there. But I think if there are ways that they can access examples of what is good or what is okay or what is acceptable, and then they just don't do it and they get it wrong, and that's on them, as opposed to there's no example anywhere and it's, potentially, that you're flirting with dancing across the line, but there's nothing out there to tell you were flirting except for some interpreted wording. So I'm just wondering what the deputies and captains and lieutenants think about that.
I agree with that, Commissioner Jackson. I think it also speaks to your other point where it can be covered in training with examples, and especially when we're talking about these jokes, just giving a plain example. Hey, look, this is an abusive use of humor right here. Same thing in this particular case. Hey, this is a TikTok video, understanding it might not be my cup of tea, but there's a generation below me that's their world. And if you're within these left and right limits over here, you're going to be okay. But if you're over here and you're kind of skirting this line, I think that speaking in plain examples like that during a training environment, I think that's what you do. We could even make videos somewhat like that, which I think would probably resonate with, and be received by Joe. I don't know what your thoughts on it, maybe received well by the members.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, because I wanted to follow up on the training piece and then also address the piece raised by Commissioner Jackson. So in terms of the training piece, we're in the process of rolling out a training that was born out of the social media case that really focuses not only on racial bias, but the officer's self-awareness and their role in some of the outcomes that they may be experiencing, particularly negative outcomes. The training first module really has a high emphasis on the historical perspective of the city of Oakland, the Black Panthers Party, how it was born in the city of Oakland, the relationship and that era between the Oakland Police Department and the Black Panthers, and then just getting to really educate them and getting them to understand the bigger picture. I bring up that training because we are in the very beginning stages of rolling it out. And so as I listen to some of the concerns on this panel, it may be a great opportunity to incorporate some of these examples that's coming out of this policy as to what could be acceptable and or not acceptable. Because again, there are people who post photos of police officers in their uniform. People post things of officers. We're in the public a lot. You'll look up, there's a picture of you posted by someone else, but we want to be careful to not have a policy that doesn't exemplify equity, where officers are not even able to post something of themselves. And so while we understand there are some challenges related to the bad jokes, in my opinion, anything posted of management, police commissioners, chiefs, department heads, to me, that, in my opinion, that's insubordination. They shouldn't do it, and it should be spelled out very frankly. But I believe that we do have the ability to train. We do have the ability to educate officers on how they need to use social media and really get them to understand the why. Because regardless of just this setting, the other setting is their legitimacy in court. A lot of these cases have been ongoing in relation to what they have been posting on Facebook, many years ago, where they were being impeached in court because of some of the things that they had posted personally on their Facebook. So I think we need to really focus on educating them as to the why and the how. And that may take some additional thought between who would be a part of the training cadre. That may include the district attorney's office. It may include someone from the defense attorney's office, but just really getting them to understand the why so that they can independently and intrinsically, make better decisions as it relates to their usage of social media.
Thank you for that, DC Lindsay. Commissioner Shea and then Mr. Parsley.
Thank you.
So two things. I think that it would be extremely helpful and I think informative to be able to see or at least learn a little bit about the training that Lindsay just mentioned, mainly because a lot of the questions that we have is, well, okay, here's this policy and we're worried about its implementation, worried about making sure we get every single lesson in there. But if the training is there, then the lessons are being taught without necessarily having to put every single iteration into this policy. And I think it would be extremely helpful to know what exactly is being trained in what form. It sounds like it's a great training. It sounds like it's an amazing training. I think it would be extremely helpful to know that that's on the back end of this policy as part of that training, so that we're not just trying to jam everything into this policy, because I don't think it necessarily needs everything. You need guidance, you need clear rules. Don't necessarily need every single lesson, even though we want to import as much as we can. That's on the training aspect. The second part I wanted to mention is I very, very much appreciate the call out. I think it's D8 or D9 to the manual of rules, that the mandatory reporting piece, because it goes towards clarity, not just necessarily referencing another policy somewhere else, but actually stating what exactly it is that we want to put in, so that anybody who reads this policy doesn't need to go to that other policy or go to that manual to figure out what exactly it is that you're trying to call out. And I think that's extremely helpful and helps with clarity of conveying the message. So I appreciated that part.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Mr. Parsley.
Thank you. Under E1 initial training, one of the provisions that jumped off the page at me was that a lateral hire could go for 6 months without any review of this policy on social media use. And I just don't understand why that's the case. I mean, I would think that an officer would be required to read this document before hitting the field at all. Day one, why 6 months?
I think what we did was we put that in there mainly just around logistics. It's when so the Oakland Police Department, unlike most other police departments in the Bay Area, we very, very rarely hire laterals.
I see.
Yeah, so almost all of our new staff come from the recruit academy. There are many reasons, one of which is it's hard to get the type of quality you're looking for in laterals. So we do have that in there, and when we do lateral academies, we have had some. There is a lateral academy, but it does not necessarily happen. So for instance, sometimes, where we've had laterals and we know, like, we have one that's hired and that person stays in the building and does, some tasks like really administrative no contact or something while we're getting the other, 4 or 5 through the background process. Then they all go through a lateral hiring. So it was just mainly about logistics. With a police academy, that's kind of the same way. You sort of gather them all up and then boom, you start the police academy. So it's the same kind of thing. But with a lateral hire, you might hire them and then it might be some weeks or maybe a month or two before you gather up a lateral class. But like I said, we don't do lateral academies pretty much at all anymore.
Thank you for that. Do you want to take us back up into the D? So I think we can probably move on from D5, everyone. I'm a little bit confused with what you're saying in D6. You just told me that I'm not allowed using any of I can't take a picture of myself in uniform. And then you say, but you might be able to if you ask for permission.
So there are some endorsement purposes, for instance. It's not commercial, but endorsement purposes. So this is specifically around commercial endorsement purposes. There's possibly endorsement purposes. So for instance, we do have some, I can think of one officer in particular. He's very involved in this charity that that builds wheelchair costumes for young children who are in wheelchairs. And so he solicits donations from other members of the department. Now, he does this on his personal time. He does not involve himself. But would he want to say, I'm Oakland police officer so-and-so, and, I'm gathering money for this charity? He might, that might be something where the department would say, oh, okay, you know what? That's an endorsement purpose. You're endorsing this particular, charity. We've decided, hey, this one is one where you can associate us with that, for instance. That was it. So it is not supposed to allow like commercial. It was mainly for those very sort of rare things, and that it was around charity was where I thought of the exemption, but that's something we can take out if we need to.
No, I appreciate the explanation though. Thank you. Department identifiers. Director Flynn, you have your hand up.
I just want to mention, and again, this is not a hard line, but I really hate to see discretion in policies, and this is a great example of maybe you can, maybe you can't, and depending on who you ask, you might get different answers, or when you ask, you might get different answers, and there's no standard or criteria. So I would actually add some descriptions to this. If you're talking about it's sometimes okay for charities, then say it's sometimes okay for charities, or something that is more like ask and see what happens, because what usually happens as a result of that kind of a policy, it's kind of a non-policy, and it just depends on who gets asked and what mood they're in or how they feel about it. And it turns out maybe not to be so fair to the officer themselves. because they love their thing as much as somebody else loves their thing, and they don't understand why one person got a no and somebody else got a yes. Just something to think about. This is very loose again, and very, who knows what the standard is or what the outcomes are going to be and whether or not they're going to be fair and just.
Understood.
Is that doable? Because I can see I see your point, Director, especially if, again, one charity, one group wants to do something in the other charity, and they don't get permission. Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. I don't know if there is any language from any of these technology firms, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, on commercials and endorsements. But it would seem to me that and I hate to over process this, but it seems to me like if you're on a board for a youth center, or if you're promoting Girl Scout cookies for the year, whatever, that there should be a waiver is not the right word, but you indicate that almost like you do a disclosure, so that OPD, somebody signs off and says they're aware. And, as long as you're not wearing a chastity belt as the form of your uniform for the Girl Scouts, I mean, again, trying to make fun of something, that whomever submits and gets approval for it can do it, so that it's not a either or, but it's a process. If you don't go through the process, then you can't do it. I don't know, just an idea.
Thank you for that. I think the lieutenant's noting it. Commissioner Shea.
I had a similar point. I was going to ask if it makes sense to address it not in the policy, but or not with specific delineations of categories of groups, but some sort of process, a panel of people who all three need to agree, or two people agree of some sort, to reduce the possibility of some sort of untoward discretion towards one group or another group, or one person asking or another person asking.
Thank you for that. DC Lindsay.
Okay, I was trying to, okay, there we are. So I'm pretty certain, and this is just because I was very active on the OBOA for many years as a younger officer, that there is some language around this already that exists, and that the chief had certain agreements outlined, that governed the 501c3s that were already in existence, like the LPOA, the APOA, the OBOA, and there may be some others. So I'm pretty certain that there is already some language there. I just can't think of if it's the MOU or if it's a particular policy, but I definitely think that there should be some touch points before anyone posts anything, for endorsement purposes for the Oakland Police Department. It could be the bureau chief or the division commander. So that's something that we could, bring to the chief, just to kind of, make sure that, this would be doable, but I definitely think it should be some endorsement. I know for those 501c3 entities, there's language that governs what they can and cannot do. So there's already some rules in place. So maybe we can take a look at that and, that language, and see if that could be helpful for us to kind of, get some clarity as to what direction we can go for this particular portion of the policy.
It seems the captain is also agreeing with you. I was also thinking of a way to track. Yeah, if you guys wouldn't mind finding that language and sharing that would be really helpful, and certainly a reference in the document, if not the language itself, both maybe, the language and then the reference to this other document. Moving on, I think identifiers feels fairly straightforward.
Quick question for the media members. For D9, prohibition of use of for city email, can you foresee anything or any type of operation, undercover, otherwise, that this might obstruct?
So we tried, and what I tried to do is make it very clear. So when we have the definitions, which are a little earlier in the policy, to specifically around personal social media, so that that does not impact operations. So if there are things, like our Vice unit does use social media, for instance, to rescue trafficked minors and trafficked persons, and communicate surreptitiously with those abusers to try and bring them to justice, for instance, that would not be under this policy, because that would not be personal social media. So we did try and carve that out.
Appreciate it.
Would you mind giving us, I'd love to hear a little more about D11. And before you do, Anne Janks did have her hand up. Anne, you go first.
No, because your question is in sequence.
Yeah, D11 makes me scratch my head a little and makes me very nervous.
Yeah, so I think this was initially mainly around content that users might not have control over. So understanding that social media is a relatively fluid medium, where in much of it, it is the user that has control. But, and like I said, and also like Captain Holmgren, I don't use social media that much, but I know that there are other platforms where you might have a page or something like that, and then others post stuff on your page. So you are doing fine, and then someone else who is, quote unquote, your friend posts something that's against this policy, right? Totally unbeknownst to you, or, without your knowledge or consent or something like that. I think the main thrust there was to try and, get rid of, and I'm probably dating myself here, but the Facebook wall that used to exist, where people would quote a post on your wall, and so removing something, if someone said something that was on your, wall or something like that, that was contrary to the policy, and removing that was the thrust of what we were going for in the first paragraph. And then the second one was something that was added after the ad hocs, and did address a point that we had where there were issues where, even if someone, posts a picture of me and them at an academy graduation in our uniforms, I might not want my picture at all in uniform on social media, period. And so, even something that's totally innocuous, perfectly fine, that if they post and I ask them, hey, could you please remove that would be removed in a reasonable and prompt amount of time.
Thank you, Lieutenant. That first paragraph, just again from an outsider's perspective, reads like hurry up and delete. Have a look at your social media platforms and see what you need to delete. So, okay. Captain Holmgren.
I agree with you, Ronnie. It's almost kind of saying like, hey, clean this up really quick if you see something on there, right? That's the initial impression of it when I read that. So I do agree with you on that. I think if there's a way that we could either narrow that down, Joe, or be more specific about how you just described it, which makes sense. Because on its face value like that, I read it as, hey, if you see this, hurry up and clean it up.
Okay.
And sorry, and I do see Commissioner Shea's hand up. To the second paragraph also lands again I'm sharing an outsider's perspective because you're in it, so I know your intention is to come across a certain way. But that second paragraph makes it sound like I can if you and I, so we're both in a department, you refuse to take down something that I asked you to, I can now do something about it because it's in the policy. I've asked you to take it down and you haven't. So I hold that thought. Commissioner Shea.
I am thinking of a different situation. That was a really good point. I am thinking of a different situation of when you have new recruits, laterals, or new members of the department who have presumably cleared some sort of background check and investigation, but are reading this policy and realizing that some of the things that are on their social media from maybe college, from high school, maybe in violation of the policy. What is the thought about how we want to address that in such a way that that's, I think, taking us in a different direction, but I see that DC Lindsay has their hand up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. I actually, I have a story and then maybe we can come up with a solution. So I remember, I don't check my Facebook that often, maybe like once every 2 or 3 months. And I remembered someone posted something that ended up on my page and I didn't know how to, I wasn't a techie, so I didn't know how to take it down or, so I ended up just blocking them and, just going through that process. But I wonder if we could add a link or if we should add a link just to kind of help people navigate, like, because some folks, I can see people getting in trouble because let's say our intel unit does an audit, which we do. We audit people's social media and that's how we kind of flag things. And so something could be up, a person didn't realize it, but now you're getting investigated and you're like, well, I didn't even know it was there, so I don't know how we could address that, but I can certainly see how a person could end up in that really, in a bad situation just because someone else posts something and you're not checking and then it's there and, so I don't know how we could address that, but I know I'm repeating myself, but it could definitely happen to a person.
I got a question for you on that. Does the audit unit actually make recommendations about deleting, or would they be savvy enough to go? So say maybe there's a self-report or a safe surrender of some sort, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like, I got this post on my social media. I have no idea what to do about it or how to get it off. Can you help me? What is the point of contact for OVD? Kind of self-surrender or safe surrender of firearms. I got a firearm. I know you want it off the street. I don't want it anymore.
Yeah, that's the part I was thinking, how can we address it? If it's something derogatory where, it's another officer, they have to report it, that mandatory reporting. So, and that's already happening. We just had a situation last week where that very thing just happened. Someone reported another officer based on something that they observed that came through social media. So, but in those instances, I do believe that, it's something we should consider, or maybe that can be added to the training. I don't know. We just have to brainstorm that. But that's a good question.
And I say that because it could be, your example was Facebook, but I don't know if we want resources. We're going to have 12 different resources that constantly need to be updated every 5-6 months about how to remove things, right? And that's going to be a lot of work to put into a policy or to keep updated in some way, as opposed to just referring to a unit to handle it and deal with more important things that are going on.
Commissioner Jackson.
So, and maybe this is wonky, I don't know, but it's almost like we all have to file our taxes every year. At least I like to think we do, or check our credit scores. We should have an annual checkup on our social media. And there I have a family member at Facebook. I don't know what kind of trainings they actually offer. I know LinkedIn, they all do these trainings, and maybe there's a training that we could tape for the purpose of reuse, particularly around taking something on that's on somebody else's page. Or, I know that people will often say, like, these days, oh, these are great pictures, but shouldn't they have their masks on? It's not anybody I know. It's not any of their business. They don't know what the COVID protocols were, blah, blah, blah. But there is a way to delete those, messages. So I'm happy to reach out and figure out if that training exists for the benefit of having a video that people can reference, a link to something that can help. But I'm almost thinking, that people should think about, not unlike how, I don't know if we all get our teeth cleaned twice a year, but this issue with taxes, right? Also do a check on your social media. And that way you're not just, oh my God, I didn't know that was there. You actually are checking for it, once a month or, I don't know, twice a year. Because this is that audience. They live in it and you cannot tear them away from it. So at least show them how to play, respectably in the sandbox, so to speak.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. Anne?
I mean, in terms of what Chief Lindsay was worried about, I think that if you haven't posted anything, it's quite clear that you haven't been there. Rather than trying to put resources, the fact is that I'm pretty sure you can Google how to remove a comment, how to remove a post. We are not the first people who have faced this challenge. And for the next social media iteration that does not exist and won't be part of the link that we offer. I mean, it's there. If you don't know how to do it and you need to do it, you're going to do what we do every day, which is ask somebody else who's more likely to know than we are, I think, or Google it or whatever. I mean, and I think that it's going to be pretty obvious if you don't use a page very often, because you're not going to have anything live on the page for a long period of time if you're in between your semi-annual social media checks or whatever. I mean, this is the problem with trying to talk about something that is constantly changing, I think.
Thanks, Anne. I mean, as much as it's helpful in the Intel world, it was our responsibility, which meant that none of us had a social media footprint for a very long time. But I know that we are, it got me thinking. But before I share my thoughts, I think that's it for D. So clearly we've got, that removal of personal social media, a rewrite. I see you've noted that. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the mandatory reporting. And I appreciate being very clear here that members shall report content activity. Can we say something more about to who's the first person that they report to? Is it the auditor of social media? The fewer times that you have to go to yet another document in order to understand something, I think is beneficial, if it's possible for us to say that.
I mean, we've got some time. Lieutenant, can you click on that? Is that a live link currently?
Yes.
Would you mind?
Not at all. And I know I'm not sharing there, so I'll reshare what popped up here, which was the manual of rules. And so when it says, I think 314.48,
page 20.
Yeah, so it does vary. And the reason why we don't specifically call out in policies, a specific person, is because, on the other end, and I agree, the more you don't have to reference back to a specific document, the better. But, we also don't want to have things in one document and then, something changes and we have to find 5 instances of where that's referenced, as opposed to, just changing in the one. So this one, it does say that the members who become aware of violations that have to report either orally or writing to that person's supervisor or to the Internal Affairs Division. And so we do have a clear delineation of who it is who violations have to be reported to.
And the DC's also added a refer General Order M3 for mandatory reporting. So if you wouldn't mind adding that additional reference to the draft document as well.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Anne?
Just make it so we're referring to two different documents that they have to look at.
Well, I mean, they have to learn the policies anyway. What would it look like to spell it out, Lieutenant? And then, Mr. Passy, I do see your hand up.
Thank you.
You know what? Given that there are, I think, changes coming to internal affairs, I think that argues Lieutenant Turner's point very well.
Okay.
As much as possible, I try and stay with the manual of rules because that does stays the most constant and is always a touchstone. When there's areas where a policy doesn't necessarily cover or anything, the ultimate question when someone violates anything is what manual of rules section did they violate? It's not did they violate policy D whatever, what it's did you violate the manual of rules, and any policy violation is that something like that. So that's why it's usually a good place to refer back to.
Thank you, Mr. Parsley. And then Director Flynn.
Yes, I just had a brief comment on the heading for D12. It says mandatory reporting. I think it would be a little more helpful if it was a little more explicit and said something like mandatory reporting of social media policy violations, so that when somebody glances through the document, it informs them of what's in it a little more thoroughly. So that's it.
Director Flynn, you had your hand up?
I think I've answered my own question. It just, because we're flipping back and forth between documents and I'm not familiar with any of these manuals or sets of rules, I'm wondering why we have things in two places, but I think I can imagine what the answer is. Why don't we just use the rules? And why do we need a second policy?
Can someone from OPD actually answer? I think it's also important for public awareness, seeing as this is recorded.
Yeah, absolutely. So the manual of rules is kind of the law, and it sets forth, you know, both sort of the things that must be done and must not be done. So it can be very very general, like members shall follow the policy. All right, shall follow all policies. And then, you know, a policy will say, you know, in this situation, we do this, or in that situation, we do that, something like that. A policy also might say, like in this one, give some guidance on what to do or some different situations. It might be a little bit more general. So the manual of rules also has some things that don't necessarily fit into any other policy, and it's a very clear touchstone. So there is, when we're dealing with a highly rule-based organization like law enforcement, because we have the laws that we enforce, and there's different codes like the penal code or the vehicle code or something like that. So I think it's probably natural that it turned out in this manner, the same sort of enforcement mechanism that we enforce then is used to enforce the rules within the departments. But that's kind of how it is. And one of the reasons why the policies are sort of spread out is because the specific policy can deal with one specific issue. Like this one deals with social media, or we have one that deals with uniforms or something like that. But the manual of rules takes a much larger and broader idea of, don't violate the policy, for instance, a much more global view.
And it does refer back to policies, does it? I guess I'm very interested in what makes this culture tick, because a lot of this framework has already been in place and it's already been violated. And is it because it wasn't linked right to the rules? Or, I mean, I'm always looking for root causes of why there's already a lot here that didn't get applied, right? That didn't get followed. And I'm so curious about, is that because people don't really look at the details of the policy? They just look at the rules, or, and just that we're kind of thinking as we go, how do we actually change the culture of the department? Because there's a lot of rules. And it seems like every time we have a scandal, those rules have been broken. And maybe the rules could be improved. And I know that the chief wants these rules improved, and I'm not opposed to doing that, because policies need to be updated. And, that's good. It's a good thing that we're updating it. But I'm also like wondering, what difference is it going to make? And just, that's always the question we ask in equity. What impact is this going to have? And why do we think it's going to have that impact? So, it's just that sort of reflection point. And as we were flipping back and forth, I'm kind of like, so how does this serve us to get the outcomes that we want? And I'm not judging, I'm just wondering. It causes me to get curious.
Well, luckily the DC has her hand up. So yeah, DC Lindsay, do you want to try and take that one on?
Well, I was going to take on a couple of things. The way we're making my videos. Okay. So when when you go through the academy, and when you go through like advanced officer school, like a lot of things are ingrained in us. It's a lot of repetition, because there's so many things that we have to, have rules for, whether it's, as it relates to crime, as it relates to courts and court procedures, as it relates to dealing with people on probation or parole, as it relates to the administrative rules. There's a lot of rules. And so we have a way to help officers remember rules, right? Memorize. So when people say, like, if you say to me, refer to C1, right? I bet you Joe knows and Roland knows exactly what C1 is. M3, everybody knows M3 is IAD. That's kind of the way that we have, kind of taught ourselves how to remember so many rules, because there's so many rules for us to remember. And so this policy, people are going to say, what's this, D18? Yeah, D18. So after they get the training and after they remember the highlights of this particular policy, how we kind of acculturate them, they'll remember, oh, D18 is the social media policy, and they will remember the highlights of this policy. Because social media has been like ever evolving in this industry, we found ourselves not in a place where we needed to be in terms of being progressive, in terms of being ahead of the curve, in relation to having the right types of policies and procedures, and that can kind of have, tripwires and things to, mitigate risk. And so we're here now. We're looking at best practices. We're looking at what makes sense. We're looking at what's going to minimize the department from being sued or having, bringing disrepute onto the city or to the department. So we're here now, but just kind of like how we're acculturated, this is how it is. So once this goes out, people say D18, they're going to remember it, because, it's a lot. If you look at go to our Power DMS, if you look at our manual rules, when we went through an academy, we had to memorize certain things all the way down to a semicolon. And it was very intense. It's very serious. You had to study that stuff day in and day out. And so that's just kind of where we're at. And so when you talk about culture, we do have a culture of, memorizing things that are important and ingraining in our police officers and even our professional staff members. These are the things that you need to memorize so you don't get in trouble, so you don't catch a case, so you don't find yourself on a negative end. So I don't know if that answers the question. We're hoping that the outcome of this is
it
that
doesn't. But it's okay. I carry a different weight on this stuff, because I think that what happened in this particular controversy that got us here is making people very afraid of who's in the department and how they interpret rules, and whether or not they think those rules apply to them, and whether or not we can trust that they're not coming for us. Now, I know that some of that is unwarranted. I know that. I mean, I'm sort of exaggerating for the sake of getting my message across, but I'm really interested in how does this reassure that the culture is actually going to change? Because I'm pretty sure that what was done in this particular case violated all kinds of rules. It didn't violate a social media rule, because we didn't have one, or a social media policy, but we have rules in the city of Oakland that also apply to the police department about what you can do on city time and with city devices. Those rules exist. And I know memorizing them is important, but following them is even more important. So I just am always wondering, are we writing something here that's going to really get through to the folks that now seem a little bit scary to some of us?
So, Director, thank you for that. We'll say goodbye to Commissioner Jackson because I believe that she has to drop off early. Captain, you had your hand up. Did you want to?
Yeah, I was just appreciating Director Flynn's question, because it's complex. I mean, I asked that myself, right? I think partially some of it is the evolution of things, and we don't find out how bad it is sometimes until we really step in it really, really bad. I think as we have this expectation that officers are doing things this way, and then when we introduce new tools, even something like when cell phones first came out, right? You think it's simple, like get every member of the department cell phone so we can communicate with the people we serve. And then you find out, hey, why are you calling your girlfriend on this phone? Why are you texting people? So, oh my God, we got to start to think about this. Even equipment, tasers. Hey, you know what? This new equipment, make sure we know so the social media thing, even though I think it caught us. It caught us. You know what? We got caught not in a good way on this one, and I think that's where this stems from. Now, again, I agree. There have been policies and expectations that our members should have been abiding by for some time, and there's no excuse for that. I do think this does help, though, as we start to maybe just clarify some things and bring things into the light. And I think with consistent maintenance and training and observations and awareness that we do create a culture that is able to police itself and call things out when it's not right. Like, hey, what are you doing here? That's not how we were trained, right? Through that. Yeah. So I think that's the hope, and that's the goal here. But
sure, I got you. And rolling out a new policy is an opportunity for repetition, and repetition is always good. I think it's a positive thing. There is this little thing that I have brought up. You have been here before. When I was talking about that, actually this particular topic that happened in this particular way is actually quite scary to some of us, because it suggests, it has the whiff of an affiliation that could be very scary. It doesn't mean that it's there, but I don't know if we're getting to that. It's like, this is really, really serious. We have a huge uptick in this movement across the country that are running around saying they're going to start another civil war. And that's not light stuff for some of us. And so I just want to make sure that we figure out how to make this say, no, people, we're really on it. We know this is serious. This isn't just about not embarrassing the department. This is about not terrorizing people who live in this city. Because we don't know who's got the uniform and the gun. I've said that once before. We don't know who that person is now, and we're kind of worried. And I think that's not unfounded, given the data that has been provided nationally about what's going on in the military and in policing with regard to affiliations with this group that seems to want to bring our country down. This is a little bit more than some offensive content for me. I mean, I don't like offensive content either, and I certainly wouldn't want anybody to bring embarrassment upon the department by posting offensive content. But the reason we're here, actually, to me, has really deep and serious ramifications. So it's kind of on the extreme end for me. You've got, offensive content over here that might bother me, but might not bother you, right? That kind of offensive content. And then you've got things that are actually part of something that's going on nationally that is actually very worrying. It's causing people themselves to take up arms, which I don't think is a good thing. It's causing more people to take up arms because they're afraid and they think they might have to protect themselves. This is the community I live in. and I just want to have we really wrapped our heads around what a serious thing this was in relationship not only to OPD, but what's going on nationally and where it shakes our confidence. And I believe you all are serious. Don't get me wrong. I'm not questioning your seriousness. I just want to make sure that we are holding that, because I'm holding it, because we can't have a just society where people of color and Jewish people and certain people are living in fear of perhaps people who wear uniforms. And we already know we have that in the Black community to a certain degree, but this kind of took it to another level when it happens around something like January 6th, which was a highly symbolic and very frightening event, right? So that's all. And I'm just asking the question to say, how are we wrapping our heads around this in a big enough way? And because I just have to say those things because it's my job. And also I feel it. It's like I'm resisting. I'm not going to get a gun. I'm not going to get a gun. I'm not going to get a gun. But what am I going to do if the Civil War starts and I don't know who to call for help, right? And so you're caught in this place, right? And that's what's going on. The number of Black folks and other folks that are suddenly getting permits to carry is astounding. And it's out of fear. It is not out of, I've always, people have always wanted to have a gun. It's really not. It's because it's getting kind of scary out there. So just keep thinking about it and how we can present this, and not just as a personal freedom, First Amendment thing, but that we are living in treacherous times where people are becoming more and more frightened on a daily basis.
Great comments, great comments.
I appreciate that, Director. Thank you. And do keep asking us that. Do keep keeping us honest. Commissioner Shea and then DC Lindsay.
I think DC was up before me.
I think she might have still had her hand up. DC, new comment, new hand?
All right, I'll just.
Oh, my apologies. I didn't lower my hand. I'm sorry.
No worries. I thought so. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
So I know that we're doing this policy as a reaction to what happened, this Instagram scandal. I also know that the members of OPD that are here because they want to change the culture. You've seen the bad parts. You want to make change. That's why you're in these positions. That's why you're contributing to this ad hoc. And I think what we're getting at is we want to make these policies not just to create band-aids. We want to actually help you create the change for our community, right? And hoping that we both instill in this policy the band-aid that we need to fix through policy that wasn't covered by manual overrules, but also to instill the values to create that culture shift so that we can address an undercurrent that there is a perception that is running through the department, which we have no idea, probably their idea. And so hopefully, not only with your participation in this ad hoc, but also in other ad hocs, which may get more at the root of the issue. We have the white supremacist ad hoc that we had for a little bit. We have the racial profiling ad hoc. And hopefully we can start working on things that not just instill those values that you want to see in the department, but also, start to address issues in advance that you see coming, right? We don't want to be responsive, because when we're responsive, then the community gets worried, and that's part of the sort of relationship between OPD and the community. So hope to keep this partnership going.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Anne.
This is really such an interesting and thoughtful discussion. I'm kind of surprised at how long it took me to notice a couple of things in this draft that I just wanted to mention. And maybe I've missed some of them. And one thing that I think that Commissioner Jackson brought up, which is the smallest point, and that is that I actually think that it's worth saying that if you are going to post pictures of yourself on social media in uniform, it'd be really good if you were following OPD policy.
Can you take us to the section, please, Anne? As in, just call it out, and the lieutenant's still sharing his screen. What section are you referring to? Uniforms, back up.
Yeah. Because there's an awful lot of discussion about it when there's a photo of a police car, parked across the bike lane, or officers, out in public without masks on at a period of time when masks are in fact required. And So it just seems to me that in the interest of not making things worse, that would be a good thing to add. That's my most minor point.
I'm so sorry, I missed the ad. What did you want added to the uniforms? I missed the first bit.
If you're going to post a photo of yourself in uniform, it would be really good to be following department policies in the photo.
Okay,
That wasn't the language. Stop making
No,
faces, Joe.
that's
Wasn't
okay,
the
that's
language,
okay.
but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Lieutenant, go up just a little bit, because there was a conversation about like they're not allowed to post in uniform, and then there are moments where they're allowed to post in uniform. So Lieutenant, do you see, can we track where we'd put that in?
Yes, yes, it would be basically after this first part here, this first two paragraphs.
Okay.
You know, basically, yeah, if you're going to post a picture of yourself, don't be a picture of yourself depicting you violating policy. That would be probably a good idea, just in general.
That would be good.
Don't take pictures of yourself violating the law is another one that people violate on social media all the time. That's another story.
Perhaps the language is make if picture in accordance with DGO uniform policy.
Yeah.
But here are a couple of other things that I am interested in. One is, as near as I can tell, there's no language that talks about participating on site that are espousing hate, etc. Right? So I'm on the Northern California white supremacist site, and I don't post anything offensive, but it's going to still be very problematic for the department that I'm on there. All I'm doing is advertising bunnies for sale, and only for pets, not for meat. But there I am, and I'm on the white supremacists of Northern California site on a regular basis. And I think that that too is problematic for the department. I think it's going to be problematic when that officer is in a court and the defense attorney says, Officer Jenks, you regularly are on the white supremacist site, are you not? You're a member of that community. And I'm not sure that we've actually talked about that.
So two things come up for me though. One, you can't stop people from doing anything. But two, this is like, if you're on the site, I don't know that I would know unless you're using your work phone.
I'm posting on it, Rania. I'm just not posting anything racist on it.
Oh, no, then hang on, because isn't that covered? Go up to the, Lieutenant, would you mind taking us back up to the intro? Didn't we put anything that, or do you want it in rules? Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, it's a bit late, so I'm just not tracking. I think I'm trying to track your I get the sentiment, but I'm also just a little bit like, you visiting a site, and so you are posting on a social media site.
I'm posting on the Northern California white supremacist website. Other people are on there. They post that we need to take up arms, et cetera, to protect ourselves from everybody who's not white. You're saying very, very bad things. I, however, do not post anything bad. I post perfectly anodyne things on this racist site, which I'm clearly a member of. I interact with other people. I just never say anything offensive. And I'm suggesting that too is a problem. My public participation on the site is in and of itself a problem.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I think I get it. Lieutenant Turner, I know that you've been trying to put your hand up, but you can't put your hand up because you're screen sharing. So, Lieutenant Turner.
Yeah, thank you. This, I think Anne's comments are, kind of brought me back to what Director Flynn was talking about, which is kind of one of the questions, why do we have rules? And I think, especially why do we have so many rules like this? And I think it comes, I would posit the answer is that when we have this sort of clash of mores or ideas of how to behave, or that don't necessarily align, that rules follow, because rules substitute and are oftentimes a poor substitute for an expectation of behavior. And when you look at societies, smaller societies or something like that, where there are a lot of sort of unwritten rules or things like that, it's mainly around the idea that we all understand the expectations of behavior. And so when I, thinking about that, I've been thinking about that since that discussion, and that kind of crystallized it, because it was, I could see that rule that you're suggesting, which I think Anne is very, apropos. It's useful, right? But I could see other things, like, for instance, people might say something like, Facebook is an extremely toxic place, so should we then ban our officers from, being on Facebook? And I offer it to kind of show the limitations of rules. There's always going to be something that the rule does not cover. And it is this thing that is much harder to change is around the culture. I think what Chief Lindsay really tried to describe it as the why. What are we doing here? Why are we doing it? And sometimes I think Director Flynn's point to me that spoke to me was that sometimes when we are really focused on these rules, we lose the why. We memorize a lot of rules, and that can be problematic when you are looking at a situation of what rule is this, what rule is that, when instead we're asking, and I think we should be asking the officers, what is the right thing to do, and really looking at that. So that was my point. And then to that, I think there is an area in this policy, directly to what Ann said about addressing these sorts of participation in these types of sites that have the same type of extremism. We could probably use the same language there around extremism, some of the other things that we have in the policy to address those type of sites, but always kind of coming back to that main mission around what are we trying to do, which is provide success for our staff, provide them a way to complete their mission so that they can successfully serve the community, and build them up to be better people, which is difficult.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Commissioner Shea. And just a quick time check. We're at 7:50, so 10 minutes.
Thank you. So sorry, Lieutenant Turner, do you mind pointing us to the section that you think might address this situation? Did you say that it should, or there is a section?
It should, yeah. So if we, I think I was saying that we kind of use some of the same language around extremism that we have in like D4, talking about that the way extremism is kind of defined, and then using that to point to like participation in other sites or something like that. I think that could be an avenue, but I don't necessarily think it's in there right now.
It's not. And so that's kind of what I was thinking, because with the example that Anne mentioned isn't in the policy because there is no actual posting, disseminating, or transmitting of content necessarily. But I do think that particular scenario may get into some First Amendment issues, in that when I think of a site that Anne mentions, I think of it as a forum. It's not necessarily a forum. It might be a website where you just create a feed or do something of the sort, but that requires registering for an account of some way. That would be the only way you would know that a member is actually participating in that particular situation. And that gets to association as opposed to the actual dissemination or transmitting, right? And I wonder, that's where I start to get a little bit iffier about First Amendment.
So I would say one thing is that we do have, and I can actually share just real fast so that everyone is aware, that the chief has put forth a memo. I know this is kind of small, but that is very clear about that we affiliations with anti-government or extremist groups, right? That there is a zero tolerance because there's that city council resolution as well. So we do have, affiliation with a subversive group or something like that would be a violation, of some other policy. So like Commissioner Flynn said, or Director Flynn, excuse me, that there's already some rules. It's really around an understanding of, is that behavior unacceptable, right? Which kind of goes back a little bit to my point around the idea of a shared norm, right?
But I thought that in the revised intro, that there was a paragraph related to any affiliation with marginalized, any extremist groups, any group that can be, blah, 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 blah. And we kind of listed that out. That's why I was wondering if taking us back to that.
I assume that no one has filed a lawsuit to challenge that resolution.
No, and yeah, you're right, because we're trying to create a rule to fix a cultural problem, and it's hard to do that.
Anne, I think your hand went back up.
Did. So I have been in touch with the ACLU, and we can certainly bring them in as one of our subject matter experts. They are remarkably, I'm going to get in trouble for characterizing another person who's more knowledgeable than I am, but they seem unconcerned. And I always like to make rules that a reasonable person who doesn't know what immutable means can understand. And that's why I think that if it implies an association, which to me is a little bit less than an affiliation, but is still very problematic, that it's worth saying that spending time on a site that is devoted to hate, and especially organizational sites, is problematic. Even if you are not personally posting that it does imply an association, and it seems to me it's worth kind of reflecting that. The other
okay, if I can just interject on that, I see how this, I'd be a little concerned, and I just want to weigh in. As a Palestinian and a daughter of a Palestinian, most of the sites I visit are deemed as something in this country. So I hear you on the sites that you mentioned. I guess I'm kind of falling into this discussion. Says who?
That's why I was advised by one of the subject matter experts that I hope that we will be inviting to stay away from referring to things as extremists, and instead talk very, very specifically about the types of concerns that we're reflecting, and it's specifically because of accusations that Black Lives Matter, or a group that's advocating that Palestinians be treated like humans, are somehow extremist, and that's a reason to avoid terminology like that. But I just wanted to raise this for discussion next time, and that is, in terms of the things that I think are most likely to cause problems, one is, and I'm not sure the best way to frame it, or if I'll get enough agreement, is something that talks about that it would be very helpful if officers were somewhat careful about how they talk about policing. Some of the very, very concerning Instagram posts were about uses of force and joking about how you lie about how much force was used. And I spend a lot of time on social media sites where there's a video, not in Oakland, Lieutenant Turner, but there's a video of a handcuffed resident and somebody in a police uniform kicking them in the face. And in the comments, there will be people saying, well, they should have complied, right? And it's not too far of a stretch to say that somebody who's making jokes on Instagram about lying about uses of force would make a comment like, well, you should just comply. And that is a very problematic statement. and that discussions of, I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think it's worth considering something that talks about, you know, discussions around policing and dismissing and minimizing and just, you know, those kinds of current events that occur, where you'll see people characterizing themselves as police officers, celebrating the death of somebody or things like that in those instances.
Can we, would you feel comfortable if that were added under the abuse of humor? Didn't this point that we'll be adding that the lieutenant noted? And I want to acknowledge that.
I don't know that they're joking. The only other thing that I wanted to ask is that I was kind of expecting that we were going to receive a draft of the policy on public expression, which I think would just be really valuable to have as we're looking at this policy, and other policies or training bulletins that have to do with social media or public expression. And I'm just wondering.
Okay, thank you for that. Hold that. Chair, and then we'll stop at 8. Thank you, DC. Chair Malele.
Yeah, no, I was just wanting to do a time check so that we end on time. Do you want to let us know what next steps are? Are we just have a few more sections, or are we carrying on this section next time? Or
no, I feel like we are done with section D. Lieutenant Turner, I feel like you have what you need. We at least went through it. So Lieutenant's going to give that a second spin. When we come back, March 1, we'll be starting on considerations, section C. I want to just note that the March 15th I have us, and I will send this to the panelists so that you can see what I'm referring to. March 15th, we should be covering the training section. And I wonder whether, since it is small copy in the policy, whether OPD reps actually mind taking up some of that meeting to talk us through or walk us through some of the training that's going to be associated with this. Now, I know that your training might not be done, but you've referred to training a couple of times. So that's about mid-March. I seed that in the hopes that maybe you can help illuminate both this panel and members of the public when you talk to training. So we can actually make use of that and expand a little bit. We won't go into the language of your training, that's not our mandate, but certainly it would be helpful. So the 15th. So Chair, sorry, to your point, next time we're coming back with section C, people, considerations. Yeah, and then quick trots.
And that's on March 1st.
March 1st, considerations, yes. And Lieutenant Turner's going to do his magic, spin it again. We'll have that. And then obviously I'm saving time for the end, one final walkthrough of the full document. So if you don't see your stuff, please hold on to it. We'll bring it back up. And it's 8. And thank you. Good night. You guys have been terrific. Thank you so much for everyone's participation. Appreciate you. Members of the public that are listening in, we do not take verbal comment. Please feel free to use the chat. Please write in your comments. Meant to say that. All right. Thanks so much. Good night. See you in a couple of weeks.
Will you take just the, everyone can go, but give
Hang on.
this caller.
Bear with me, Commissioner. Hang on. Sorry.
Okay. Never mind.